Hey, welcome guys to week 8 of this amazing TSL experience. And we actually weren't going to make a workshopping video for this, but we did because we're going over the 5 templates of the rapport cycles. Now, number 1, let's keep it simple. We just want to keep it to the question, ground, challenge, template. If we move within that, we're good. We're going to learn how to do this. We're going to learn how to make our conversations have connecting impact to people. This is something extra. You know, this is for when you want to take it a step further. We have different templates to move within and get creative with. And of course, you can change them. You hear my delivery, you hear me go over them, you hear the different situations of how I transition to them and all that sort of stuff and the history, yada, yada, yada. It's good stuff. And remember, the recipe for success in TSL is number 1, show up on the calls and interact, participate, share a part of yourself, and get feedback from other people back about their experience. That's how we work. That's what we teach. Express, reciprocate. That's the values in that connection that happens. That's how we do it, right? The other thing too is the assignments and exercises, do them, take them seriously. This isn't something where it's just like telling you to do it to keep busy. This is how you get results and how you get better. It's how we get consistent success with our TSL groups. And also the last thing is take the theory, turn it into application, apply it to your life, get creative, because when you do that, stuff changes, stuff gets better, life gets awesome, the technique progresses. What can I say? If you're not on TSL Online, upgrade to it. It's how the program was meant to be worked. Communicate with us, connect, grow. You have it within you to share your story no matter who you are. I believe that. We've proved it and how we work. Learn to express. Don't make stuff up. Be you, live the life you're meant to live, and have the right people in it. That's what you're going to learn here tonight.
All right, guys, here we are going to workshop some rapport cycles. So here we are in the 8th week. There's a lot of information we've gotten, but this is something which is truly one of the most important parts. Okay. So we've already learned what it takes to get into a rapport cycle. We've already learned the recipe of a rapport cycle, and we should be out there applying them. So if you go to your workbook, TSL workbook, I believe, for connecting, we can look at towards the bottom of the document, this area here where we actually break down some of the rapport cycles. Now, these are templates for you to use them in your assignments and in your exercises and your weekly assignments and exercises that are very important. We give you a real simple template, which is actually this one here. It's cycle 2, or a variation of that, where we just qualify, we ground, qualify, define. And it's really simple how we make that one work, right? We can get it, we can apply it, we can move towards it and really build an intense connection with it. But what we have here are a few other variations. The challenge, of course, qualify to define, we've already talked about. The 5-point rapport, okay, that was actually the original one. We have the cycle, we have vague to deep. All of these are actually going to be very helpful for you to use and apply in different social situations and ultimately allow you to get more dynamic in your rapport cycles. Okay, so we can follow along with the workbook here. Very simple, excuse me, and test these out. Maybe a week, maybe for a few days. Maybe I would actually, rather than go for a quantity of times you're going to do it, look at the quantity of times you can successfully use it within a certain area of time. What I mean by that is, let's say if we look at the challenge here, that's a great cycle. I think you should try it. It'll assert yourself a little bit better. But if we move towards that and we're trying to work on the challenge rapport cycle template, what is really great about it is that we can try and do it maybe 5 times out of 10 and make it work. Okay. So 5 times out of 10 times, we have actually succeeded to achieve rapport where we both feel connected. She cares about us, we care about them, or it could be with a salesperson or whatever. Could be a he or a she. But also that we've done it in a certain period of time. So getting 5 successes over a period of 3 months, we're not going to really set it into our brains and build that belief that it's a great possible way to communicate. So let's get into this. The challenge, a very, very good one. And a lot of times in the current TSLs, some of the guys have forgotten to use how awesome this is. So we have some things in here and we say when to use it. As soon as you realize you like somebody. And let me just tell you guys, really start getting good at opening with your rapport cycles. I can't emphasize that enough. This one, maybe not so much, but man, qualify to define, qualify to frame, whatever you want to call it. That's an excellent one that you can open with, the one that we use in our weekly assignments. So basically what we're going to do here is really simple. We're going to state something really powerful, something that we believe in. And the best thing that we can do right here is go to this, right? And we actually call this a ground rather than an opening qualifier. The reason why we call it a ground is because it's stating our perspective. So here we're just simply saying, I've always been someone driven by my dreams. I grew up in a small town, and when I was 16, I left, and the rest is history. What are you passionate about? And as you can see, as it's rightfully called the challenge, we're just moving right to a challenge. All right to it. And we're really utilizing our ground, our perspective, our display of self, our story of us, or how we shaped, how we think, the real value in this. And we're using that to connect. Okay, we're using that because we don't want advice. That's why we challenge. That's why we ask a question. We want to relate. We want to connect on that. All right. So here's another one. I've always been someone that has taken chances. But the biggest thing that always got in my way was what other people thought of me. Look, you're attractive, but are you somebody who's confident enough to not have your fears get in the way of who you attract? And so we think about this. All right. For myself, in my career of talking to women, I've talked to many different types of women. Let's say I was at a club and I open her and say, "Hey, man, you look very tall." That was something that if anybody hung out in Dallas in 2006 and 2007, you heard that far too much. But anyway, you open with whatever it is and say, "Hey, I got a question for you. You seem cool, but I'm not so sure yet." But it has to do with man, how do I say, you're going to get mad? I can't ask you this. You're doing your push-pull stuff back and forth. And in that example, it's actually opening with a rapport cycle, and I'm just adding some push-pull, some bait, and you could even make some teases that go along with it that push me in that direction. So it's a very TSL way to do things. Hey, let me ask you something. Oh, geez, I interrupted. You're one of those girls. Fuck, I can't talk to you. Man, what are you drinking? Really? Okay. My mom told me never to trust a girl who drank. Well, whatever that clear liquid's like, always have color in your drink. Anyway, but hey, what's your name? My name's Steve. So we get to this mode. As soon as I can isolate, I want to continue on with my cycle. Say, hey, well, okay, yeah, I said I wanted to ask you something, but it has to do with something only a hot chick who has dating experience can answer. All right. As soon as she isolates, as soon as she only talks to me, and if anybody's worked with me in field, I don't care if you talk to the group or not. It's truly it's a tactic, but it's a very singular tactic. It's very particular. You can avoid it. Group theory, nonsense. Okay. Yeah, it works if you want to go that route, but don't worry about it. Just talk to who you want to talk to. Have your hips and your shoulders facing who you want to talk to. You can acknowledge the rest of the group, but literally 90% should all be to who you want to talk to. Have them close to you. If they're far away from you, get them close to you. That is your job. All right. And the social dynamic of this club life game. So as soon as I hit a moment of isolation, all I need to justify a question, to really assert who I am, is a ground, a perspective. And this came so fluidly when I used to write stacks for people. So as soon as I isolate the girl, and by isolation, I just mean she is only talking to me. Her friends could be there, but they're not paying attention to me. They're talking to themselves. We could go on and on about all the social theory of this, but basically, the more people there are, the quicker they will isolate you with their friend. So if there's 5 people, almost immediately you and she will talk to each other if you're competent at talking, which is easy to do. You should expect that result. If it's two people, still talk to the person you want to talk to. It's sad you're ignoring their friend, but they'll play with their phone. They'll do something. They might pull the girl away, but if she likes it, they won't pull their friend away. Okay. Break the rules, guys. Stop thinking in the template of narcissistic guys who didn't have any friends. Group theory, forget it. And as soon as she's paying attention to me, I could say, you know what? Okay. I grew up and with some interesting parents, we'll say, and an older brother, but he was 5 years older than me. And so we had a difference. So there was a lot of independence to how I thought. And what I noticed is there's a certain level of trust with people that, I don't know. Let me just ask you this question. What is the most trustworthy act a friend could do? So as quick as I want, I could start to insert this type of rapport cycle in there. All right. I could tell my ground, which is that I grew up with some interesting parents, had a brother, but I was independent because he was so much older than me. And I learned that trust had a different meaning, or whatever it is, something that I'm really interested in. So what is the most trustworthy character trait that somebody might have? Now, as we know with rapport cycles, that might actually confuse her a little bit. That's fine. We can let that happen. But we just need to then follow it up with another ground and continue and move in these directions. But another example of this is, let's say I'm at a cafe. I'm somewhere, it's late at night. In fact, I remember a situation where a client actually told me, he's like, this is a funny story. He's like, I want to see you approach that group and talk to that girl. And so I said, okay, well, we can't work magic here, but here's what happens. Here's what I'm going to try and do. It's always good to think, it's always good to try and process out what you want to do. So I was like, okay, well, I want to talk to this girl. So I'm going to be next to her. I'm going to point my hips and shoulders closest to her. And as soon as I approached, another girl paid way more attention to me than that girl. And the girl that I was attempting to talk to was really dull. So I just switched and talked to her. If I don't have, of course, talk to who you want to talk to. But if there's two attractive girls, I'm going to pick the one that is vibing with what I say in the first 5 seconds the most. So I immediately switch around and talk to the other girl. But I said, what are you guys doing here? It's girls' night out, yada, yada, yada. And then I said, you know what? You remind me of one of my friends. And she was somebody that always had an opinion on something, but was like really good. She was into, she opened up a restaurant, really into cooking, really good in business and very successful person, but at the same time made bad decisions about her relationships. Let me just ask you this. What is it that you're really attracted to? So immediately just move on to the challenge. And it was true. She reminded me of somebody that had opened up a restaurant, who was very successful, an amazing person, did great things with their lives, but was really poor at building their relationships. So I just took that perspective that I immediately noticed about somebody who was giving me the right kind of attention and moved on to her, and used that to talk about things. So here what's happening is I'm not really giving you this magic social dynamic. What I'm giving you is, if there's any magic, it's magic for your life. You having the confidence to be fluid in your interactions and speak in that area. And actually, this girl was a tough nut to crack. It turns out she was Israeli, and they were having some Jewish meetup group. And I have some experience with Israeli women. So I just moved kind of in that direction. But in challenges, let me just tell you, women who have a strong mentality, which Israeli women tend to have, they dig the challenge. Not in a pushy way, but in a way that is based off myself. You remind me of a friend. She had these qualities. Do you have these qualities? She comes back at me, well, I have good relationships. I know how to have them, yes, but I'm single right now, yada, yada, yada. Okay, well, cool. I can tell you're confident. But let me actually ask you this. Like, what gives fulfillment? Like, I want to know from you, because I can tell you have an answer. What gives fulfillment for your relationships? So I just keep moving the challenge around. The challenge is key. The ground and the challenge and the relationship between those is so important. All right. The qualified a frame is the one that we always bring up. Very simple template. And it's actually how we learn. Remember, the recipe, the 4 components to a rapport cycle, are going to be a question, a ground, and a challenge. Or here I call it a question again, and then a frame or a definition. Okay, really simple. If we have those things, it can work. Now, the one problem in these examples where it's not really a problem, but it's a little bit more advanced. If you're just starting out with this, I would say just stick to the template of question, ground, question. Don't worry about the frame just yet. We worry about the frame because it's like a pivot point in social dynamics. It's a point of control or, where all the good stuff happens. And really a frame is something that will naturally set. Okay, a definition, a frame will naturally start to set if we just do this right, if we build a natural conversation. And just to pinpoint it out, a frame would be something along the lines of, I'm a teacher, you're a student. Nobody really said anything like that, but somehow we assumed it. So what we want our frames to be, it depends on what you want in your social dynamic, but all social dynamics have many different frames. But in the case of men talking to women, a few of the popular frames would be that you're sexually aggressive and I'm sexually aggressive. You're a sexual person and I see that you're a sexual person. I'm a sexual person and you specifically turn me on in these specific ways with your specific qualities. It might be that I'm open-minded and you are looking for an outlet for being open-minded or an open-minded person, or we're both open-minded. You're very independent and you think on your own. These were frames that we knew we wanted to get to. Now, a lot of people have these and we don't want to fake them. We can't really falsely implant them. It's truly impossible to manipulate if you're being honest. Very easy, to trick somebody or fool them if you are dishonest. In fact, it's the only route. But a frame will naturally take place, and I'll show you if we can work this question, ground, question, or oftentimes referred to question, ground, challenge. And basically here, our main goal is this opening question is to get us on the topic. Okay. Then we give a ground which shapes our perspective. This is where we implant our value in who we are, not our social value, but our value in our character, our value in what it would mean to have a relationship with us, our value in our emotion, our perspective, our sexuality, the experience of interacting with us. That's the importance of the ground. And then we're going to, once again, wrap it up with another question. Okay. And as you can see, this one begins and ends with very similar questions. When to do this? I would say, once again, as soon as you know you like somebody, as soon as you're in isolation, and in fact, you can open with this. You might want to pick a different opening question, but you can definitely open with this. So for this one, asking about sexuality, everybody wants to know about that. I would ask it pretty quick. The one thing that's going to help you out is if you ask a sexuality question quick, your ground is going to have to be good, because they may not know you or trust you or whatever. So you say, hey, are you somebody that is comfortable with their sexuality? And oftentimes people are going to answer yes. It doesn't matter so much what they answer. Here it says before they even answer, we're going to define what that means by grounding. They can answer. They can have a conversation. It doesn't really matter. And what we're basically going to say is the reason why I ask is because I always was somebody, okay, who felt that most people are more insecure about the things they don't talk about. And sex is one of those things. In fact, for myself, I had a huge issue with it. Okay. And then we're just going to ask another question again. So, are you somebody that is confident with your sexuality? All right. And it could actually be the same question. Are you somebody that's comfortable with your sexuality? If we get good at that, that's key. All right. So if we just start having an interaction that's like, hey, I got a question for you. You seem like a very open-minded, cool person. Are you somebody that's comfortable with your sexuality? I know it's a taboo topic and all that sort of stuff, but look, the reason why I ask is because I was always somebody that thought people were more insecure about the things they don't talk about, the things that they hide. And one of those, I mean, we don't have many outlets in our society to talk about sex, so people are really insecure about their sexuality. In fact, I had like a huge issue with it myself. So, like, are you somebody that is comfortable with your sexuality? Now, in that, she might not feel comfortable to answer that. Very, very common. Very common. And so, what we'd have to do there is continue to ground. Now, our end goal is different for everybody, right? Our end goal might be to, maybe it might be to same night lay, where it's like, hey, we want to get laid. We want to talk to women. There's plenty of women that want to get laid too. Let's get there through conversation. Our goal might be to find a relationship. Our goal might be to get laid, but if a relationship happens, that's cool too. Our goal might be to make a friend. Our goal might be to just find trustworthy people that we can hang out with. So we have many, many, many different goals, right? And this is really what's going to guide the direction of this. However, let's guide it in a direction to where we want to date somebody. That's a good middle ground. And basically, we ask the second question. We say, so are you somebody that's comfortable with your sexuality? She might get a little bit nervous. We say, look, I don't want you to get too nervous here, but for myself, let me talk about my issues, is that my parents were pretty conservative. They talked about sex, but they didn't really talk about it. And whenever I acted out on something that was at all exciting, I would get punished. And then when I got hormones, I was excited about stuff and, was punished for acting out in those ways. And to be honest, nobody teaches us how to have sex. So my first sexual experiences were really bad. And then I thought I was bad. So I guess what I'm really asking here, now my second challenge, is when was the last time somebody really connected with your sexuality? She might be a little bit confused there. So then I just take the liberty to ground again. Very simple. See how this is cycling into my perspective. I'm using a question and ground, question and ground, question and ground sequence to build a connection, right? And I might say, well, look, let me clear up what that means. My challenge was, when was the last time somebody connected with your sexuality? I could say, well, look, what I'm actually asking is not when they connected with you sexually, but when they connected to your sexuality, meaning what you like, who you are, what your expression is, of your feminine urges and representation and allure. Like, when was the last time, I'm just going to challenge again, when was the last time somebody just really, you got to bask in your femininity and a guy was just like, wow, that's beautiful, and you felt beautiful about it? When was the last time you felt beautiful about your sexuality? And as you can see there, I took this vague idea, this concept, right, of sexuality, of representation, of people connecting with it, of people feeling uncomfortable with it. And slowly, through my grounds and challenges, I made it more and more specific. Went to this vague idea of sexuality and what it is. And slowly, well, actually very quickly, using a structured conversation of this qualify to define, the kind of like standard rapport cycle system, and moved it into a very specific thing. When was the last time you felt like a beautiful sexual woman? Didn't even have to be a sex act. When did you feel that? When did you think about that? And so when we were learning rapport cycles a little bit further back in this workbook, we learned that we don't want to be specific. We want to get conceptual. Well, once we can be conceptual and have them understand it, it can be specific. Now, through all that, let's say she can't even answer it, but she's comfortable to think about the last time she felt sexual. She's comfortable to acknowledge that. The frame there that's been set is that I understand her sexuality, to which she can open up her sexuality to me, to which she can express that to me. Now, in the social dynamic, it depends on the situation. I can't escalate if we're with her friends and she has plans in 5 minutes to go do something, but I can, well, it will determine how I escalate. I can escalate in terms of getting her number and setting up a date. If I'm alone at her house, maybe she's feeling a sexual urge, and then I can fulfill that or do a physical road of escalation. So we always think in that. Now, what's actually happened is I've made it possible so that I've set a frame that isn't really talked about. She feels comfortable with her sexuality around me. Now, here, I actually say the frame, and I say, you know what? You're somebody I can tell that's really open-minded. I feel that you're somebody that I can really trust. Okay. So in that, there I'm kind of moving the conversation in a direction that is more favorable to what I want. Let's look at this one here. And here we also have these two questions being very similar to each other. The topic is purpose. It's kind of important. Probably should have said that. Look at your topics. Look at your topics and the directions that you want to move in. That is quite possibly one of the most important components, recipes in your rapport cycle. So we say, what is something that you're driven by? Very simple question to ask. We could be in a cafe, we could be in a nightclub, we could be in a restaurant, we could be at the bookstore. We initiate conversation. We could even open with this. In fact, there are more situations that we could open with this than we couldn't. Waitress walks up to our table. We say, hey, before you take our order, I'd like to know something because I don't know anything about you, and you'll give me an honest answer. What are you driven by? Let's say we're in a bar, low stimuli, happy hour. There's a couple of people hanging out. Walk up to somebody who say, excuse me one second, I have a question for you. It's kind of deep, but I think he'll give me a good answer. What are you driven by? Let's say we're in a clothing store and one of the sales ladies comes to help us out. Say, man, I really like this. It's kind of cool, but before I get your opinion on that, let me ask you this. What are you driven by? We should be opening with our rapport cycles and use as little bit of the social dynamic to gain attention is necessary. All right. The only one where it might be a little bit harder, but in 2 minutes you could get there, is in a nightclub where people are partying and going crazy, right? They go there to party and dance. We don't want to interrupt that. We want to work within the partying and dancing to then isolate and get to this. Hey, you know what? What are you driven by? Like, I know we're having fun and whatever, but what are you driven by? Look, the reason why I ask is because I have had some huge blocks in my life. And what I realized is when I had nothing, I was only left with one thing, and that was my purpose. It was my focus to my connections between people and my drive and everything that gave me meaning. So what is it that you're really driven by? Now here, once again, I follow the structure of qualify to frame to move to the frame. You know what? I can tell you're somebody that knows exactly what you were born to do, but your relationships get in the way. You're not somebody that is confident in how to attract the right man. So this one is actually moving in a very interesting direction. In writing this, the direction was very clear that I wanted to share a bit of myself, this ground, that I was passionate and driven in certain ways, but I wanted to move towards the topic of her ability to attract, her feminine ability to attract somebody, which is a pretty big deal. Okay. So it's very quickly moving there. In fact, if you were to be a purist for this, the frame is a big pivot point in the conversation. The frame and that second qualifier, the challenge, is a big pivot point in how we move things. Here's an example, another example. Let's say I want to move towards her sexual mind, right? So I'm going to change the frame of this, but I could say, hey, what are you driven by? The reason why I ask is because, like, in my life, I've had some huge blocks. Like, there were times when I had nothing, no money. I didn't have the resources. My family wasn't really on my side. And I was really left with one thing, and that was my purpose, and that was the connections of the close people in my life, which weren't, necessarily the people that you always depended on. So let me ask you, like, what really gives you drive and motivation? Like, what do you have with that as she's thinking it? Especially if I want to move to a frame really quick, I have to have good delivery, work on that, stand in front of the mirror. But she doesn't need to interact in the conversation that much. I can just try and set the frame. I go, you know what? I can tell you're thinking about it and all that sort of stuff. Man, I like you. But it's funny because different people have different sides to them. But the way you think, it's very sensual. Take that the right way. Like it's hot, man. A lot of guys don't see it. Like, it is hot. You are a very like sexually aggressive person, but not in the like I'm a hot girl at a club way, but in a way where like you confuse the shit out of men. Fuck, I can't talk to you. Hold on. Let me call my mom first and make sure that this is appropriate. Let me call your mom. That might be better. It might be a little bit more safer. No, man, you are fucking amazing. So I could then move very quickly to a frame and a definition. Now, what's going to set that frame is her acceptance of it and, being within it. But if I really do see those things, if I really do notice those things about her, I want to talk to them. And to be honest, many women have a sexual side that men don't talk to. They have a sexual side that men might, catcall at or whatever. But they don't have a sexual side that is mental. They don't have a sexual side which is a presence. They don't have a sexual side which is their femininity. Basically, go and get a Cosmopolitan magazine, and look at the headlines. And that's how women think about sex, not how men think about sex. So if you can communicate that to them, it's great. All right. Now, one last thing that I want to tell you about this, because this template of the qualified frame, we can open with it. We can use it in so many different ways, but let's go for another one because we hit on it a little bit with the sexuality one of where we got a little bit more specific. Let's start with a vague topic, but move in a very specific direction of how we want to go. So the topic could be lack of sexual experience. All right. Tough to talk about a specific. Let's say the specific is you're a virgin and you're afraid of that. Okay. Start off with a question. And remember, we want people to understand us. We don't want people to judge us. People judge a specific. And when people are really judgmental, I would actually watch out for that as well. But we don't want that judgment. It's very, very, very more engaging and alluring that we don't state a specific because it makes it very hard for somebody to judge. So if you're talking to a very judgmental person, I could say a lot about this. I could be very judgmental over judgmental people, but you need a specific in order to judge. And judgment divides. It disconnects. It doesn't allow a connection to happen. We want a connection to happen. So we could say, hey, we go with our question here. We say, look, I have a question, and it has to do with your experience with relationships and people and all that sort of stuff. Like, are you somebody that has had a lot of relationships? And they say yes or no or whatever, but they're thinking about it. They're engaged. And so now we simply ground. It's like, well, man, Steve, how do we talk about, our lack of sexual experience? It's nobody wants to talk about that. But remember, as long as people understand you and can connect with you, it's great. You can have fulfillment. So positive or negative isn't bad. It's that how can we connect? And that's what makes everything good. It could be a negative thing, but because we can connect, it's good. And we can say, well, look, I'm kind of nervous talking about this, but I haven't had much experience with relationships. I have a lot of friends, and those are relationships, close friends. But with women and connecting in those ways, it's difficult, to find a good relationship. However, I have a friend, or I have a lot of friends who give me advice, and all the women that I talk to, although they have lots of advice to give, haven't necessarily had a lot of good relationships, but they've had experience. And so what I want to ask you is basically like, what is the best experience of your relationships? Like, what gives you experience in that? So she'll give you an opinion. Might even be hard for that, but it's kind of confusing. Remember, we're being somewhat vague here. So now we're going to just cycle back and well, actually, we just asked a question, and we're going to move to the ground again. We're going to say, well, look, that's interesting. You say X, Y, and Z about relationships, but see, what I think is interesting is how guys think about sex. We're actually on the ground here. Sorry about that. How guys think about sex and how women think about sex are different. Like, women usually think about an experience or how somebody relates to an emotion or how somebody sees something. And that's what gives everybody value. But women are always thinking about that. Men are thinking about it particular. They're thinking about the sex act. They're thinking about how they have sex, the story they can tell their friends, or, what qualities about somebody. But I think women also, can like that stuff too. They just don't communicate it in the same way. But what was, and now we move to the question here. Sorry, it's hard to talk and click on all this at the same time. But you could say, what was the time when you realized a man saw you for what you really wanted to be? She tells you she's uncomfortable, she's thinking about it, whatever it is. And you say, well, look, my biggest fear is that I haven't had sex with anybody and what the meaning of that is. And when you haven't done something, you overthink it. Okay. So that's actually stating a perspective. You just say, hey, well, I haven't had sex with anybody. But when you haven't done something, you overthink it. You fantasize about it. You build up all these things that you need in order to experience it, which really isn't it. But for you, I'm wondering if you've ever really experienced a great relationship that you think you deserve. Because if you haven't, most likely you're building up a fantasy about it or thinking what it is you need or why it isn't there. So let me ask you this, like, what would make you really happy and fulfilled as a woman? Like, what would make you happy in that relationship? In fact, let me ask you specifically, what is it that is unique about you that people don't notice? Like, nobody's really saw that side to you. So now I've taken this vague concept of sexual experience. I've even shared in my grounds my lack of sexual experience. But I'm actually asking them specifically, what is it that they're really looking for? What is missing from their sexual relationships and interaction? They may or may not answer. They may not be able to answer. You just met this person. I mean, once again, you could open with this. And you could move this quickly there. You might have some side conversations in between the grounds and the challenges or whatever, but man, bring it back. Use those challenges, use those grounds to steer your conversation back. But you could move it that quickly there and start to express yourself and elicit a part of her. And as long as she is thinking about it, you're good. As long as she's thinking about that, she may not be able to answer. Man, I don't know. You're asking all these deep questions. At that point, you could either show intent, you could frame as we see here, or you could transition to something else. But I would say, hey, you know what? You don't need to overthink this. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to put you on the spot and make you feel nervous, but you're somebody I'd actually like to talk to. You're pretty cool. Like, let me take you out sometime. We should have coffee. I may not be the most experienced guy, but I actually think I understand you. And that's how you want to be communicating. Now, it's very difficult for somebody to communicate who hasn't had a lot of experiences, but that's a good way to get some. All right. So here we have the original rapport cycle. So basically the story goes is I used to write a lot of stacks Those were these customized things that I don't advertise for people anymore. But man, I still get people requesting them, and they're a pretty penny. So I wanted to come up with a system where I didn't have to spend 40 hours of writing for one person and have them pay $5,000 or $10,000 to get some good quality content and figure out how to do it themselves. All right. And it's funny because when I look back at the stacks, they're so complex. There's so many awesome things happening. And this may be a simpler version, but it's a way that you could, you could really, really move in some awesome directions. So the 5-point qualification. And what was happening here was I had a one-on-one with a friend of mine. At the time he was a client, but a good friend of mine. He was a little bit older. He had a lot of experience in the past, but he wanted to get back on the horse. And so he was like, man, you move through these conversations so fluidly. How do you do it? So here I wanted to come up with a model where he could repeat and think and improv with. So we actually had these 5 blocks. And he said, block 1, you're going to bring up a topic. Block 2, you're going to briefly mention how it affects you. Block 3, you're going to qualify hard. Block 4, you're going to ground. I say buffer and ground, but you'll see. And then block 5, you're going to frame and transition. And we physically have these blocks. We actually move them around. And so here we want the topic of ideals. Remember, we're always starting with a topic. That's key. Pick your topics from your identity workbook. Very simple to do, very easy to do. And start having some faith and communicating yourself. So you could say, hey, you know how what you do in life might have nothing to do with what you really think internally. So you just bring up a topic. Could be anything. Hey, you know what? Did you watch the Olympics? Like, who watches competitive dancing? Hey, did you see the last fight? Like, what do you think about how that affects people? In fact, we could talk about any of those things with ideals. You could say, hey, do you exercise? I mean, because it's kind of weird because exercise is such a tough thing for some people, but it all comes down to what your ideals are. That's how I think about it. All right. So we're just implanting an idea. We just want to talk about a topic. Now we're basically going to state how that affects us, which is really like a ground. All right. And make it real simple. This is something that's always been really tough for me. Move to a heavy qualifier, or we could even say a challenge. For instance, do you know what the purest ideals are? Like, what are your deepest ideals? Now we're just going to go back into a story. We're just going to basically state a ground about our life, a perspective, somebody else's story, but it's still stating our perspective. We say, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intimidate you there. That's the buffer part. Say, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intimidate you there, but it's something for me that's always affected me and has been the fact that I have not even been able to live in my ideals fully. People always say that they do what they want. They live their ideals, but in reality, they really don't. Like life, family, situations, they all get in the way. When I was growing up, my family was really got in the way of a lot of things, and I never had the confidence to do what was really mine, especially my ideals. I allowed my identity to be shaped not by the life inside me, but the life around me. So there we're actually sharing a story about ourselves. Let's repeat this really quick. We're going to bring up a topic. Let's say we want to talk about a career change, our purpose, how we want to move. Say, hey, have you ever thought that like changing a career might change your purpose? Well, look, for me, it's something that has been so trying. I've done it, but I haven't many times. In fact, let me just ask you this. Let me just like be frank with you. What What is your purpose? What do you really want to do with your life? What gives you meaning? Okay, well, look, for me, this is, like I said, it's kind of a big deal. I've switched careers. I've, done different things, worked in art, worked in, as a waiter, whatever. Yeah, I've done all sorts of crazy different jobs, but finding myself has never been something that's fulfilled. And I wonder why that is. I wonder if that's possible. I wonder if it's just a false dream that, America sells to you or whatever. I'm really curious what you have to say about it. In that sense, we've done these 4 points once again, and you see how it works. This template can seem very complex to people, but it's very simple. It's great. If you can really practice this, I would really encourage you to, because again, it's the original. Say, man, are you somebody that really likes to travel? Just getting on the topic, right? Well, I love traveling. It changes my life. It's one of the biggest influences for me. In fact, if there was one place you could go, what do you think it would bring out of you? I don't really want to know where you'd want to go, but what would that bring out of you? What would that experience change for you? Oh, I don't know. I said, well, okay. I don't mean to be too pushy, but I remember the first person who told me about traveling, and they linked it to life's purpose. And actually, I was on a trip. I was on a really short trip. I just took a road trip about 100 miles outside of town. And I met somebody at a cafe, and they got all like psychic purpose on me. And I'm not a big fan of that, but I really listened to them, and they just said, you need to move. You need to go to a place where you can just exist and express yourself, and it'll be great. And I really took it to heart. That person could have been in any place in my hometown, and I would not have listened to them. But because I was on this experience, I did. And then I moved. I moved thousands and thousands of miles away and started a new life. And in that, it didn't teach me anything that I thought it would, but it taught me how to take care of myself, and I could have faith in who I was no matter what happened. And that is one of the greatest life lessons I could ever have. So there, the only confusing part is really this fourth part, the ground. Get your grounds good. Next week in storytelling, we'll definitely get on that. But this first part, this setup is so easy. Hey, I was wondering, what do you think that like the weather really changes your mindset? Well, because it does for me. It does for me. That's how it affects me, right? Heavy qualifier. What do you think is your ideal mindset? Let me just ask you. That's such an easy setup. It's great. It's beautiful. Now, as we end it here, like one of the things that I hit on hard a lot of times is set up your frame, set up your definition, set up your transition. So here we say either transition or frame. And in this particular instance with ideals, we say, I think I get along best with people who have open minds like you. That's really impressive. All right. Most people probably don't see that, and that frustrates you. But man, it's also what makes you attractive. So here we see how that's tactically moving along in a kind of like an SNL PUA type frame. Very simple through conversation, but that frame or that transition can go anywhere. It can go into whatever your motive wants. So if we were to take a step back and we just go, well, actually, let's look at this second example, if I can find it here. We have sexuality and say, how people like communicate on different levels, just bringing up the topic, how it affects me. I think that I've been really bold about certain things, but when it comes to other things, I get really nervous. In fact, let me just ask you straight up. What is a way that you felt differently with somebody and comfortable with your sexuality? Boom. They're like, whoa, too much, Steve. I just met you. You say, oh, look, sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. Notice the buffer there. Sorry, I didn't mean to offend you, but the reason why I ask is because the best example of showing you how dynamics can change people is, look, let's look at in terms of business. The things that have shaped my life most are when I realized I could be more comfortable alone with a girl. And I barely knew that I could even be alone with myself. Okay. And it's really something that's hard to admit for myself. Now I move on to the definition. Look, even though we just met, I can tell that you're somebody who really knows what they want. And you're looking for somebody that you could feel comfortable and alone with. And man, do you think that you're sexy? So now I'm actually moving on to another challenge. Pretty good one there, too. In fact, it's funny because this ground is totally flubbed. But if I were to redo something like this off the top of my head, it would be like, man, do you think people communicate on different levels? Well, look, man, I'll tell you this. Some things I'm like really bold at. Like I can just go crazy and go off on and all that sort of stuff. But other things like make me so nervous. Like they terrify me. In fact, let me just ask you, the things that people are terrified most about are like intimate relationships. Like, are you comfortable? In fact, what makes you comfortable about sexuality? Okay. Didn't mean to step over the line there. Sorry about that. But really, it's like when you are comfortable with somebody and you trust somebody and you're alone with them, man, you should be able to be yourself. And a lot of people don't feel like themselves. They're shaped by all these like bad beliefs and what they're supposed to do and the shoulds and all that sort of stuff. And it screws them all up. In fact, look, I can just tell that you're an awesome person. Like you're somebody, I mean, even though we just met, you're somebody that like I click with. It's cool. Like I don't usually have conversation. Like I can tell you understand me, but we should talk in a place where we could talk. But let me ask you this. Like, do you know that you're sexy? Like, do you know that you're sexy in a way that I'm seeing you sexy right now? Is that some like, how do you feel hot right now? Man, because I think I see something deeper. Man, you've had like a lot of relationships and gotten a lot of what you wanted, but you've never really gotten what you wanted. Like you know exactly what I'm talking about. And we can move very quickly into that. Club, I don't give a shit, man. Of course, bookstore, daytime, whatever, easy. But especially when I hung out in clubs, I'd say that stuff all day long. And guess what? If you get into somebody's head and especially access their sexuality, they don't forget you. All right. Let's move on to the cycle. Yeah. All right. Well, the beautiful thing of the cycle is really what we've been preaching the whole time. Okay, we say when to use it. But look, guys, when to use it, open with it. Especially with the cycle and the qualify to frame, or the, basically the template that we've been using in our assignments and exercises to work the rapport cycles. Use those whenever you want. Use those to open as soon as you're in like isolation with somebody. Man, go for it. Okay. So what's happening with the cycle is this is where we start to structure stuff out. And if you really work this template, you can do some good stuff. Okay. So again, if you're watching this, you're getting 5 different templates. Pick one, focus on it. This one here, it's great because it will teach you how to move in a direction. It will teach you how to go from vague to specific. Okay, and what's happening with the cycles, we're just asking question after question. And there's a little bit of a ground in each question, but we move in a clear and calculated way. All right. So we're basically on the topic of masculine and feminine roles. Great one of my favorites. I mean, shit, it's my job, right? So I basically say, do you think that, and again, once we're alone, once we know we like them, whatever, assert yourself. Have some pride that you can assert yourself very good. Do you think that men and women act like how you envision men and women should act? She thinks for a little bit. Okay, look, what I mean by that is that a lot of people say masculine and feminine is, are 2 different things, or they're the same, or whatever, but nobody really gets into how they feel, as a man or a woman. Nobody has that independence. Do you feel that way? thinks about it for a second. Well, look, once again, don't mean to confuse you, but what I mean is that women feel they attract the wrong type of person a lot of times. And do you think that femininity attracts the right kind of masculinity? Says yes, no, maybe so, thinks about it, and then you move on to, look, do you think people see you in the way that you see yourself? Here we're getting clearly much more specific towards them. And then we move, because look, I think that you're really sweet, but at the same time, you're really confronted with something that, gets you nervous. Look, do you have trouble truly showing your most attractive side to people? Now, in all this, we're moving towards a more specific topic. All right. And let me actually, you see me do this all the time when I improv a lot of these things. Let me actually move and take you through how we structure this rather than actually go over the second example, which is good and you can look at as well. But if I wanted to talk about a woman's feminine presence, I know from experience and I know from my identity workbook that I am attracted to how she thinks about sex. And when she decides that she's turned on, I know that I'm attracted to seeing her face light up and feel sexual. I know that these are things that incite sexuality in me and embrace something. Like, for instance, I could see a beautiful woman, beautiful, characteristics great. But if she can't talk and connect and feel comfortable with her sexuality, I don't want to, that would be horrible. For me specifically, I don't like that because it's like, here's this beautiful, beautiful physical expression of a human being, but she doesn't know how to be sexual and connect with it. Why would I want to spend time with that? Why would I want to be around that? And then I could take somebody who's average, but they're very good at expressing those things, and it would be awesome. I would see a window to great things. And talk to any seducer, they're going to tell you something very similar. A guy that tells you he just likes hot chicks hasn't had enough good sex in his life. This is the truth. You can definitely take that to the bank. But yeah, basically, here's the deal: is that you want to move in that direction. I know I like those things. I know I feel those things. I know that I am turned on in those ways. But I can't just start there. But if I know that and I have some social intelligence of what I like, in even especially done the identity workbook, I can just pick little things from there and say, hey, I have a question. I know I just met you. Or let's say I open with it, but I just cycle and move very direct and rapidly and through conversation to this, so that in 2 minutes we're talking about, I can see that sexual side to her. I say, you know what? I don't know you, but I have a question for you. It has to do with like what you're attracted to. Like what is the most attractive quality with a guy? And actually I've asked that so many times. They're going to say smile, humor, confidence, height, all this sort of stuff. And I say, okay. But like, what I mean is there's attraction with the physical, the mental, and the emotional. What is the most attractive quality that really makes you know you like somebody? What do you mean? Do you mean a guy that is like da da da? It's like, oh, well, okay. It doesn't have to be somebody that you're going to hook up with, but just makes you like him. You say, oh man, I want to see more of this person. Maybe you might hook up with them. Maybe you might be a friend or whatever. But what is something that just makes you go, wow, I want to feel that? Okay, so see how third into it. It's like, I want to feel that. Man, why are you asking me all these crazy questions? It's too much. Okay, well, we could stop. No big deal. Just push away. Come right back in a new direction. Push away, alleviate it. Hey, we can let the pressure. I truly don't want to have a bad conversation with anybody. But I just thought you would know, you just seem, I have a hunch about you. I'll tell you about it later. But what about a guy, really makes you feel like a woman? In fact, here's a better question. When was the last time you felt like a beautiful woman? Because you're physically there, but like, when did your emotions and mentality feel like that? Because I've done the identity workbook, I can then talk about mine. I can say, well, like the image of being a man might be like James Bond or, whatever, type of archetype that we have out there. But being a man for me is knowing how to pick my directions, handle my emotions, and handle what I feel. Like, actually, let me ask you this. When was the last time you felt turned on and it was totally cool? Like somebody like, man, see, you're making me nervous saying this because I'm like getting all, I'm thinking about some crazy, but yeah, see, your face right there is hot. That's beautiful. It's so peaceful. Like, when was the last time you allowed yourself to just feel like that? That is really attractive. And so in that, here's something which is very important. A lot of guys in the social dynamics crowd will say that if we can get somebody to talk about sex in the third person or think about sex in the third person, we can seduce them. That's actually not true. Seduction is based off of a choice that they make towards us. If she's thinking about a state that she's in with somebody else, she's having a relationship with that other person through a story that we told. That might make our chances better, but that is not what's making the seduction happen. What makes the seduction happen is in that dialogue. If you go back and listen to it, and you try it with somebody, you can get your delivery good and your eye contact and your tonality to be passable. All right. You don't have to be an expert, but to be passable. You say, well, look, when was the last time you felt like a woman? And what I mean by that is like a man, is this archetype, and I thought this and that, and my emotions and my mentality and my body imbalance. But, having a body that is sexual isn't bad. But when was the last time you got comfortable to feel, like, let that body feel what it was meant to feel? At that point, maybe, we're not picking some magic NLP, whatever form of trickery or manipulation, but maybe she's feeling something there. Maybe she's feeling something and she's feeling turned on. And when she's feeling turned on, that is when you are somebody that is going to have to take it to the connection between each other. All right. The connection of, I like that. And that's where the seduction would happen. The seduction would happen with basically when you are able to make that window of a unique quality about them that you notice and state intent towards it and say that you like it. And it's not that, hey, I like it, that's hot. It's like, I like it, but do you see that I like it? Do you like that I like it? And the exchanging of that intent is what gives that meaning and what makes the seduction process happen. So hopefully that makes some sense there. And there we're using the cycle to get there. This next one is vague to deep. So this is the last one. It's something that I always did naturally, and it's something that's very effective. So the whole idea of vague to deep is very similar to our baiting process. When we bait, one process was to ask and deny. Hey, where are you from? I can't talk to you. That's asking or deny. But vague was leading, and it allured them in. And that was actually the vague to deep, the original way of rapport cycling or storytelling that I was doing was what led to the bait. So this is actually the first way to do it. So very effective, very interesting, very good to use in conversation, and very good to make hard turns. Remember in that 5 points of qualification, make that hard turn. We do that heavy qualifier as our third move. Anyway, the thing is that here we're actually going to apply it in a conversational way. So this is a little bit more specific. When to use it? Yeah, totally. When you realize you like somebody, but also when you want to jump to a really hard topic to talk about. That is awesome. I say here it's better in low stimuli situations, but here's the real thing. It's not necessarily low stimuli situations or interactions. It's more like you've got the person isolated and they're paying full attention to you. If they have to go in 5 minutes, well, 5 minutes is plenty of time. But if they have to go in 30 seconds, if they're distracted by a lot of things, if there's something unfinished, that's when we want to go, you know what? Rapport needs to hit hard and go and then, transition to something else right away. Okay. So vague to deep has this really specific type of quality to it where you want to transition to something that would be hard to talk about. So, for instance, I would do this all the time with sex. Okay. It's one of the greatest ones. In fact, sexual openness is the topic. The vague part, let's say you're in conversation with somebody and you say, you know what? I think you might understand this, but I'm not really sure how to express it. In fact, like, are you somebody that's really open, or do you feel happy? Like when you meet somebody right away, I'm not sure if you're getting this. Like, man. Okay, look, for instance, are you somebody who feels more open towards something like sexuality with somebody? Or do you think that you're somebody that would judge and move away if they don't understand you or something like that? So there I'm using this vagueness, right? And what happens is, how I actually came up with this was I was trying to talk about sex with somebody and the girl just said, just say it, just say it. So I could say, like, let's say I wanted to talk about her level of how comfortable she is with her pussy, right? I could say, man, this is a weird question. Guys are always obsessed with like how they like present themselves. Man, the guy girl that, man, is so hard to talk about. Like, I don't know if I should say this or whatever. And I don't even know how to say it. And then she'll be like, tell me. It's essentially it's bait. I'll say, look, here's what I was getting at. I don't know how to say this properly, but guys are afraid of their dicks and relationships with their dicks, but are women comfortable? Like, are you comfortable with your pussy, your sexuality? So I would use it to move very quickly to something very deep. Clearly, she would be embarrassed. But I'd be like, well, whatever, I said it. You asked me to say it. Like, you don't need to be embarrassed. But really, then back to rapport, back to the voicing of rapport. Really, are you comfortable with that? Okay. So it could go towards so many things. Like, I just love using it for sex. Like, I know I just met you, but I have this feeling to bring this up. It's so, oh man, geez. I like, how when you go traveling and you have new experiences and you meet people and it just shapes your whole mind. And man, I'm totally confusing you here. Fuck. I'm sorry. Look, when I went traveling, and especially this one trip I went to Spain, it unleashed who I was as a sexual being. And I can tell that you're at that point where you're like right about to break, man. Like, it's like, do you feel open with who you are as a sexual being? Like, comfortable with that? Like, when was the last time you expressed that? Man, I'm sorry. Like I said, I didn't know how to ask that question, like whatever, but that's what I sense about you. And I think you understand it. So why is it wrong to ask it? So you see what's happening there. It's like some vagueness. Tell me, answer the question or ask me the question. Tell me what you're trying to say. Say it. Might be a little bit of a hard turn there, but then I just very simply back away and shape it into the right direction that I want to get in. I back away, then back to rapport. So I hope this was all very simple for you. At this point, look at this. We are done going through TSL Lesson 3 Connecting, Workbook 4. Complete guide. Man, and is this not true? The complete guide to deep rapport and meaningful connections. Some good stuff. So this is actually week 8's presentation. Sorry. Like I said, we stay on this for 3 weeks. So pretty intense stuff. I'm glad you were along the ride with me for it. And we will talk, hopefully, very soon.
There we have it. Rapport cycles. Broken down for you in the most beautiful Steve Maeda sort of way. I give you a lot of examples of how I would use them and in what situations I would use them, how to transition, all that fun stuff. So watch it, study it, do it. You can do this. Your story, your life story is amazing. Forget thinking that this value DLV, or I know those are caveman words, but or dinosaur words, whatever you want to call them, but start thinking about how you are somebody that has the story within yourself, and these are the tools to get it out. Awesome.